Chapter 15. Meet the Longbottoms, PT1. When Neville Longbottom was 2 years old, Algy Longbottom was annoyed. When his children had been young, it had fallen to his late wife Wendy to tend to them while he worked long hours building his meagre inheritance into a small fortune. Well, to be fair, meagre and small were relative terms. Algy was rather prosperous compared to most wizards, and his inheritance had given him a substantial leg up in the world. Still, his holdings were nothing compared to the Longbottom estate that went to his older brother, the late Lord Archimedes Francisco Archie Longbottom. But that wasn't what annoyed Algy. Archie married Augusta Crouch, Gussie, within the family in 1953. Their son, Frank, was born in December of 57 and displayed his first bit of accidental magic at 18 months. And that was that as far as Algy was concerned. Archie and Gussie had their heir presumptive, so barring mishap, Algy was on his own. With children of his own to feed, he put his nose to the grindstone to build up something for himself and his family, all the while knowing that little Frank's life was assured. But that wasn't what annoyed Algy. In 1972, there was a particularly nasty dragon pox outbreak that claimed Wendy and Archie both. Due to Frank's age at the time, there was a 3-month period in which Algy had been called to serve as Regent Longbottom until the boy turned 15 and could provisionally claim his lordship. Upon doing so, Lord Francisco Claudius Longbottom shook his uncle's hand warmly and gave him a small brass plaque. To Algernon Longbottom, in appreciation for services rendered, it read. From that day to the present, the two would talk no more than a dozen times, the last of which was when Frank politely but firmly denied a request to sponsor Algy's son into the ministry because his grades just aren't high enough. But that wasn't what annoyed Algy. In 1981, Death Eaters attacked Longbottom Manor and placed both its lord and its lady under the Cruciatus curse for so long that both of them were driven mad and had to be committed to St. Mungo's. Augusta was named as the custodial guardian to their infant son, Neville, but Wisengamot law decreed that Algy would be the Longbottom regent. It seemed that arrogant fool Frank hadn't bothered to make a will, and so the Wisengamot had exercised its discretion to appoint Algy as regent, because if the boy was a squib, or for some reason didn't make it to his 15th birthday, Algy was next in line of succession, and so should be acquainted with the house's affairs. The most likely scenario, however, was that Algy was now committed to 15 years of thankless drudgery managing someone else's estates while his own languished. He stoically accepted the regency and then turned control of most of his own businesses over to his son, Reginald, who he hoped was up to the challenge. But that wasn't what annoyed Algy. What annoyed Algy was that the brat wouldn't stop crying. He'd grudgingly agreed to take the boy for today because Gussie wanted to visit Frank and Alice in St. Mungo's and felt Neville was too young to go. Unfortunately, Neville was asleep when she dropped him off, and so she did not realize that she had left Ebby behind. Algy didn't know who or what Ebby was and didn't much care, but it was apparently so essential to the brat's happiness that he'd started crying immediately upon waking up in his playpen and seeing that Ebby wasn't there to greet him. And he had been crying for ever an hour now, despite the best efforts of Algy's house elves to entertain him, wailing over and over, "Want Ebby." While Algy tried to ignore the noise and get back to balancing the books for one of the farms he was now managing on the brat's account, then suddenly there was a soft pop and Neville's wailing abruptly ceased. Curious, Algy went down the hall to the living room where Neville and his playpen had been deposited. The boy was still there, giggling softly while clutching a soft black teddy bear with baby blue glass eyes. Neville looked up at Algy and smiled.
"Ebby,"
he exclaimed. Algy looked at the bear and then to Neville and then back again.
"Naturally,"
he said quietly. "Lubby, did you or any of the other elves summon that bear?"
"No, Master Algy. Little Master Neville wish really hard for his Ebby and it just come to him."
"Naturally,"
said Algy again. "Return to your other duties, all of you. You're not needed here." The 3 house elves nodded and popped away. Algy stared at the stuffed animal. He remembered it well, of course. Its name wasn't Ebby. That was just the child's way of saying LB, or more accurately, LB for Longbottom. Archie Longbottom had owned LB when he'd been a child, as had his father and grandfather before him. When Archie had turned 7, he decided he was too old for a stuffed bear and gave it to Algy as a birthday present. And when Algy had gotten a little older, he too had put it aside. But even as a child, he hoped someday he might gift it to children of his own, just as it had been gifted to him. That hope ended the day Archie had popped in
For a visit.
and idly asked if he could get LB back as a present for Frank. Algy explained that he'd already given it to his own newborn son, Reginald. Archie replied that, as a newborn, Reginald would hardly miss it. Algy pointedly reminded Archie that he himself had given it to Algy as a birthday gift. Archie answered that it had been a gift he'd made at the age of 7, before he'd realized it was something to pass from father to son. Algy answered rather coldly that he hadn't realized that a particular children's toy was somehow magically entailed as part of the lordship's bounty. Things quickly escalated to shouting on both sides before Algy finally stormed up to his son's nursery, snatched up LB and practically threw it at his brother, telling him to get out, and he hoped his little monster choked on one of LB's glass eyes. Shocked, Archie left quickly, and the two brothers didn't speak again until the following Christmas, when Archie sent a veritable flock of stuffed animals for both Reginald and his newborn sister Enid, but not LB, of course, and a letter of apology to Algy. For the sake of his children, who he thought might someday need the support of the Lord of House Longbottom, Algy accepted the apology, and his relations with Archie mostly mended. But he never forgot the incident and what it meant. That he would always be the second brother, entitled to nothing from the Longbottom name save a lump sum financial payment left to him purely out of a vague sense of parental obligation. No estates, no trust vaults, no heirlooms, not even a stuffed teddy bear to pass on to his son. And now, the final insult, Neville was indisputably a wizard, and Algy was the witness for it. Because he'd just seen the brat summon LB through accidental magic, presumably all the way from Longbottom Manor in Lancashire. Neville was a wizard, and so Neville was the heir presumptive, and thus Algy's lot in life now was to manage Neville's estates and assets until the brat was old enough to claim them for himself, at which point he would probably give Algy a brass plaque to match the other one Frank had given him years before. Algy stared for a long time at the adorable infant and his stuffed bear, and then something inside him snapped like a twig in a heavy ice storm. No, no, you little brat, it won't be that easy for you, and I certainly won't let you beat me with the help of that thing. Evniasco. There was a flash as the teddy bear vanished out of Neville's arms, startling the child, but before he could start crying again, Algy's wand flashed a second time. Obliviat. You will forget about Ebby. You will forget that you ever had a bear that looked anything like Ebby. He paused as a vicious gleam came into his eyes. But you will remember that there was once something you loved that you have now lost forever, and you will remember that the reason you lost it because you wished for it too hard. Little Neville shook his head for a few seconds and then crawled over to play with some blocks, with a strange look on his face, as if he was sad but didn't know why. Later, when Augusta returned, Algy told her that Neville had been a perfect angel and that she shouldn't hesitate to ask him to babysit whenever she needed a break. He also reminded her to be on the lookout for signs of accidental magic, because Neville was getting to that age. The next day, Algy went to Flourish and Bots and purchased several books on squibs and the latest theories about what caused them, when Neville was 3 years old. Algy had been visiting Longbottom Manor for a week, as was his right as Longbottom Regent. On the 4th day there, he was in a sitting room reading the Daily Prophet when he felt a small hand tug on his pants leg. It was the brat.
Well, hello there, little Neville.
Algy said with false kindness.
What can I do for you?
Will you read Baba Rab to me, Unkar Algy?
Babbity Rabbit, you mean? Well, where is it, Neville?
Baba Rab on the shelf in library.
The child replied.
Why don't you show me?
Algy asked, and with that, the toddler led his great-uncle to the nearby library, where Neville pointed to a book on a middle shelf. Algy noted that the bookshelf was freestanding instead of mounted to the wall, and his eyes gleamed. Oh, that's not too high, Neville. You can reach it. Show me how big and brave you are, just like your dad was. Algy smiled at Neville, who looked back up at the tall shelf nervously. Then he waddled over, and after a bit of hesitation, tried to climb up to the 3rd shelf. Just he reached the edge where the Babbity Rabbit book was, Algy pulled out his wand.
This is for you, Reginald.
He whispered as he cast a spell at the heavy bookcase, which suddenly tipped over onto Neville. The toddler fell to the floor with the bookcase poised to crush him, when suddenly it froze in mid-fall and then tipped back into place, with all the books and knickknacks that had been on it snapping back into place as if they'd never moved. All except the Babbity Rabbit book, which Neville proudly clutched in his hands. Algy stared at Neville with his eyes wide in astonishment. From some distance away, he heard Augusta call out, "Algy, what was that noise? Is Neville getting into mischief?" "It was nothing, Gussie." Then he hissed out a strong memory charm to make Neville forget what had just happened, followed maliciously by a mild stinging hex on the boy's bottom. Neville soon began crying. Just as Algy put his wand away, Augusta came around the corner. It looks like Neville tried to climb up the bookshelf to get his Babbity Rabbit book and then fell on his bum. No harm done. Augusta swept into the room and picked the child up off the floor to console him.
"Neville, I've told you, don't try to climb the furniture.